Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer, and it's been a while, but this is an episode of Deep Ultra. My good friend and someone I consider in some ways a mentor, an advisor, a voice of reason and wisdom. Elisa E is here. And also joining us today are the Crimis. And one of the really cool things that has happened over the last few years that was sort of different than before is meetings of minds and friendships and working relationships developing amongst people who one would never have thought. And when Elisa decided she would like to update her classic Our Life Beyond MK Ultra book, I introduced her to my good friends, the Crimis, who have a publishing company, and off to the races they went. Sort of, that was all I had to do was introduce them and they took it away. So here today to chat about sort of the book and her experiences in life in general and where those, sort of fit into what we're experiencing right now are Elisa E and Chris and Steve Crimis. Everybody, welcome. Nice to see you, and really joyful to my heart to see you all together because you are all some of my favorite people.
That was a lovely introduction, Emily.
We're in very good company. Yeah.
And of course, you're the point there where we all got together, because
that's right,
Elisa through Emily, because I think Elisa, you were doing a GoFundMe, you were looking, and you were just, maybe your books had just come out, I'm not sure, but you had the two separate books, and so we made a donation and bought the two books and read them and were very impressed. And then I guess it turned out that you wanted to redo your book. And so somehow Emily was involved there too.
Yeah. And
yes.
Quickly, I would say the new version, which is soon to be available, or hopefully at least for pre-order when this video comes out. We read both her books, and then, I guess within a couple of years later, we read what Elisa sent us, and it was like I never read the books before.
Yeah.
There was there was so much there that may have been newer to me at the time, and then by the time this coming through, it just cemented in a lot of things. But I think there was it's just a lot more there in these new version,
and it's cohesive.
Deeper. Yeah, and it's really well put together. I really commend Elisa for what she did, and having to put together this material. And I'll shut up and let her speak.
But I always find too that a revisit is really important. So if I read a book and then I come and revisit it a year or two later, I already have this foundation of information that I don't have to think about on the surface. And then so I've got that base, that foundation to work from, and then it comes in better in that second flowing over you. And you really did such a nice job of putting it all together, and with your collages too. That I think is really great.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank you guys again for the opportunity to do this, because they never felt complete. It was kind of a get it out there fast. People told me it's part of the protection, to get your story out really quick. And of course, I was doing self-publishing on Amazon, and you can't do color collages with black and white book. It's either all black and white or all color. And I did the black and white, and, I was grateful to get the book out, but you couldn't see anything in the collages, and the collages are now in color and vivid, and they were probably one of the most important pieces of my healing and deprogramming process. And what you were saying about revisiting, that's what happens to me even to this day, not quite so much anymore, but when I go to the collages, over the years, I would go back and look at them, and I would learn something new about my insides and my alters every single time. So no, I really appreciate the opportunity. And of course, my mind is different now than it was 10 years ago, 12 years ago when I started writing the books. I was very much still under programming and still being accessed. And I wanted to do it at that time for others that are in that process, because you feel completely insane in many respects. And I wanted them to see that you're not crazy. This is the way it starts to break down. But it's really nice to be able to go back and read a lot of the entries and then put the updates in of, you know, what I understand about it now is regarding technology, for one, which I had no concept of,
Right.
and even my esoteric studies and the occulted studies have brought a whole new perspective into where I was, who I was encountering in these other realms. And so, yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to do this. I feel very supported by the Crimis, very much. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting, you know, over the years, obviously, you know, I met you back when I was just getting started with media sort of in 2016. And I downloaded your books on Kindle, right? So I didn't have the hard copies. And I read them.
And you got the color collage that way.
Right. Well, I got well, you also sent me files that, and I remember the first time I had you on the show, we showed the collages so that people who had read them in the black and white, you know, would be able to see them as they actually were. You know, over the years, I had obviously read, you know, some of the Kathy O'Brien stuff and some of the Fritz Springmeier stuff, and you know, done lots of research and read lots of accounts, and they all like were very they present. I mean, I'm not saying that they weren't true or that they weren't important or good, but there was a few things there that would like, you know, scratch something that was, you know, pertinent to like my own experience, or that it was something that I knew to be true from things I had witnessed or observed or whatever, but didn't speak to me in the way that I experienced what this is. And that is like, it's incredibly bizarre. It isn't just sick and twisted and of a perverted sexual nature or of like a cruel nature. There's also oddities to it that are so like, they're the kind of things that like, when you think of them, because they're happening, when you're like, well, this is weird, this is what I think is happening. It sounds so weird, you would never even say it to another person because it's just that bizarre. But that is the truth of how a lot of mind control works, both on a very direct personal level and on the more like massive, like sort of remote general population propagandistic level and every level in between. And when I read your books, not only were you recounting some of the experiences in ways that were almost exactly as I had experienced them, you were noting, even if you didn't understand what they meant at that time, some of the most sort of curious oddities, right? And that served for me to be the kind of validation that allowed me to go further into my research into this stuff, into uncovering my own experiences without like the fear of being crazy, right? Because if one other person has experienced exactly what you're experienced, like you can't both be crazy in the exact same way, right? Especially you don't know each other, you have different backgrounds, different likes, different dislikes, different fears and whatnot. And if the thing is so weird and exactly the same, that can only be true if it actually exists, right? Like, and so it was the most important confirmation I needed. It wasn't nebulous or sort of like allusions to things. Like a lot of people allude to stuff and they'll go so far and they won't say the rest. And that I understand why you don't want people to think you're crazy, you want protection, but it also makes it impossible for any level of validation about whether like this is an actual thing or it's in your own mind. Right. So for me, that was, you know, something I greatly appreciated and was well worth the disturbing aspects of like, there was some things that were, you know, in your book, and I'm sure those are sort of still there, that were disturbing to the point of making me physically ill. And some of that was because I had experienced a similar thing. And so just that visceral response, but others were just imagining this happening to another person and you haven't experienced it. But I think that is like, we have to get okay with that. We're at this weird place in reality that if we're like leaving out the parts that we don't like or are uncomfortable, then like that leaves all the room necessary to keep opaque all the truth, even the things that are like wonderful and positive. Like it's that same hinge, that same fulcrum that works at all. So if we can't get okay with saying it, no matter how disturbing or weird it is, we also don't get the benefits on the other side, right? At all. So
and that's how I see that whole process of deprogramming is you got to get into all the, whatever's showing up in the dark, no matter what it does to your belief system. And I'm not just talking MK Ultras, I'm talking for everybody, whatever level of deprogramming they're doing, societal deprogramming is, and I see that, and I know we all see that, and I understand it. I had my own versions of, there were certain altars I couldn't deal with. I mean, it was just like, no, I can't go there, and it would take a year before I was able to even let them show me what they wanted to show me because I had to experience it with them. But without doing that and without taking that side of, this has always been a big thing for me, as you know, you've known me for a long time, but early on, I understand this, a lot of people were trying to say it wasn't your fault, it wasn't you, it was, something else had control, and it wasn't you that did this, that, or the other. And in the early times, that was very uncomfortable and awkward for me because I knew on some level I would never heal if I didn't take responsibility that I split. I didn't die. I split off. That's the primal response. When they're doing what they're doing, you don't think about it. You don't question whether you're gonna, should I split into another personality so I can survive? It's a primal response. Some people don't do it and they wind up dying, in the process. I split. And I'm saying this kind of as a metaphor for the bigger picture of what you're talking about. I split, and because of that, other people suffered and died. And until I got to the point where I said, okay, I wasn't volunteering, I wasn't out there consciously doing this, but I was there. I was in that body. Part of my mind was there performing whatever was performing. And once that happened, I began to truly heal. And I understood why people around me kept saying, no, it's okay, it's not you. But it never felt right. And it was a tremendous change when I took the responsibility that I survived. And because of that, these events took place. And that to me applies to the big picture. That applies to all of us, right? Until we take responsibility for our choices, our actions, our responses, our reactions, whatever it may be, we can't move forward. I mean, we really never move forward. We hit that wall that so many of us know people who hit that wall. I have people I love in my life that hit the wall over and over, and I still love them, but they're not willing to go there. It's just too much. And I understand that. I had my own, like I said, I had my own experience of having to face what we had done. And that I think it takes a lifetime, maybe a couple, I may carry that into the next one. I don't know. I'm working on it. So I appreciate, what you're saying. Really appreciate that perspective.
Yeah. Can I add the responsibility aspect of it that you mentioned? It's just so important because right now the whole narrative is a victimhood and coddling yourself and having people want to coddle you, under this umbrella of victimhood. We're all victims and everybody's a victim, and CRT is all about victimhood and all that. When the reality of it, and the biggest fear behind everything I find, and I've been writing about this, is that that the biggest fear of everybody is to go to the place where you and Emily and we have gone, where everything that everybody's been telling you through your whole life is bullshit. and you have to deal with that, and then deal with that on top of the fact of what you guys have gone through specifically, which Chris and I, somehow we escaped.
Like, yeah, I say to Steve, it's like, okay, we both went to Catholic school. How did we escape this? I had a very lovely childhood. Even
That's
though my
nice
dad,
to hear.
it was lovely. My father died when I was 4, but my mother raised us to believe that he was a saint. And I grew up thinking my father was, and probably is, I still believe he was a saint, but, and I was very religious. I wanted to join the convent when I was a child because I was just so enraptured with the narrative and the core. I believe the core of those teachings were probably valid. But anyway, it just, it's such a journey to have grown up in this sweet little town and a sweet little bubble, and then to go through the process. Now I'll be 73 next month, and I've run the gamut, and I've looked back and seen where, just about everything they told us was a lie, and going back to the victimhood. So the victimhood is so debilitating. But now I understand that that's by design. They want you to feel like a victim, and they want you to feel helpless. And that's why, Elisa, I think your work is so important across the board for everyone, because you never took on that mantle of a victim. And you have a glow and an inner beauty about you. And I've noticed this with the people. I only have looked at mostly the women's stories because I haven't really come across any of the men's stories, and I'm sure they're legion. But what I'm most impressed with the people like Kathy O'Brien, yourself, and others who have come through this, what I don't see is the rage isn't on top. I'm sure there's rage, but what I do see is this like burnished gold. Someone who's been to the underworld and back and then transmuted it. You can't destroy it, you can't fight it, but you can transmute it. And I think that's what you've done. And you've done it so elegantly and with such dignity that I think it's a life lesson for everyone. It's not just this one category of MK Ultra victims, and I don't even like that word, but we'll find a better word. But kudos to you for that.
Thank you. That's lovely.
So something you said, Elisa, I wanted to, obviously, like the taking responsibility, right, for it, like there's lots of people out there with lots of stories, and some of them have been sort of toted around, right? Toted around in a way, you know what I mean? You were not, and I think that the insistence on not being let off the hook, not being told, oh, it's okay, it's not your fault, not externalizing responsibility, right, for things, protected you from like being dragged around like a rag doll to tell your story, and you know what I'm talking about, that kind of thing. But when you, along with this also, like I agree with everything you said, but also part of the importance, to change anything, you have to be responsible for it. You can't both be a victim and be leading the charge of your life forward, right? You have to be like, okay, this all happened. I'm not 100% certain what the origin of it was, but I was there. I'm going to accept responsibility, because once I take the driver's seat, and then I'm in charge, right? And I can decide where I'm going. But and I want to see what you think about this. In my experience, and this is sometimes like super disturbing, but it's just true. All of the things, right? Like, even when something was very definitely done outside of my absolute like knowledge and consent or whatever, there's some aspect of it that like there's a truth to something that is inside of me that is being exploited to get to for the manipulation, right? It's not necessarily that, oh yeah, like I have these secret, like evil desires to do whatever, right? But there's some hole, there's some soft spot that is being exploited in order for that to be able to happen. And if we just say, well, somebody forced me, or somebody did that to me, or I was unconscious, or I was on drugs, or whatever, then it does not allow any room for healing the soft spot and making it strong so that it can't happen again. Because there's like, they're very creative, and there's a million ways, like people whose methods of operating in the world involve manipulating other people will never run out of creative ideas as to how to exploit loopholes or soft spots. So the only thing to do is to make your material, the whatever you're made up of, stronger, right? More resilient, more resistant, and also like more quickly able to spot what's happening so you can mount the appropriate sort of response or defense. And so when I dig into, because I still experience things that like feel like this is not coming from, like, why am I being steered towards something? Why does something keep happening? If I'm honest with myself, it's because there's something about whatever the underlying tone or topic or thing is that I have sort of dealt with or unexplored thoughts about, desires about, confusion about, attraction to, right? Even in a very, sometimes it's in a almost like innocent way, right? But it's like, it is coming from somewhere inside of me. Like that the ability to poke through there as opposed to 2 inches to the right is coming because I have left that spot open for whatever reason. And it's not that we want to become completely closed, right? But when you are still unclear on your feelings about something, your position on something, if you have any we all have like unexplained attractions to things, and sometimes that can be very healthy or whatnot. But until you have once you identify them, if you haven't gotten completely honest with yourself about what they are and take ownership over the parts of that are active in any kind of way, it becomes like the tiny speck of light that allows you to see it, that something else to see into the room and then begin to operate. And it becomes something that wouldn't be your interest, your desire, your place you would go with it. But that inability to say, no, this is mine, I own this, I'm running this part, right? Because maybe it's embarrassing or it alludes to something about yourself that you're not comfortable with, then like it gives the slight inch that allows the mile, right? And so that, I think, even more, like not even more, but even as much as like, okay, like I can't fix things unless I take responsibility for them. Also, right, being honest with yourself about who you are and where you're at, as uncomfortable as it is sometimes, makes it much more challenging to sort of to be exploited. Well, and what I'm immediately started thinking when you started going down this route was the arimanic double. We've all got that. It's there from the start, and it doesn't leave until the very end. And I think of the words shame and guilt, which come up hugely when you've been through the things that we've been through, and unconscionable things. Really, I mean, there's things in there that are just unconscionable. If you were to try to tell someone, there's always something you have to hold back, because if you try to tell someone, they'll blank out. The face will just, and I get that concept. They can't even conceptualize that that's actually taking place, because what is it? It's inhuman. Yes, it's inhuman. It's not human doing. It's inhuman running human. So yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think shame and guilt are two of the biggest obstacles to overcome for a deprogramming person.
But yeah, that arimanic double, we've all got it.
Could you say more about that? I don't have a clear image in my head of what that actually is.
Well, that's the Rudolf Steiner piece, the anthroposophy, which is, I mean, my understanding, this is my understanding. I'm not relaying exactly the way he would describe it, but is that is inborn in our body from the get-go. Sorry, we've got a phone, I can't turn it down. It actually lives in the nervous system of our body. It permeates through our nervous system. And it's the part of, I guess, in religious Christianity, you would describe it as the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other. And the arimanic double is probably the equivalent of the devil on the shoulder, meaning it's the thing like what Emily was talking about. This is the way I see it. It's that thing that can grab hold, that can exert itself when there's an opening. And to me, the programmers know all this stuff. Okay, they know all the esoteric occulted part of this, which is they know exactly what they need to do to allow those things to run, those things to come to the surface, those things to enter even from the outside, in addition to the arimanic double. Maybe Steve has some.
So then I just want to ask for one little bit more clarity. So then that's like the duality of the world that we live in. Is that is that where you're going to? Okay, go ahead.
Well, just, and it also reminds me, Carlos Castaneda, in his first posthumous book, at the end of the book, Don Juan starts talking about the the sorcerer's secret of secrets or something like that, and that describes this other being that that really just is within us, and and so close that you never see it. And that's part of the the last like sorcerer's kind of thing is to go past that. And in general, like first lesson from the I Ching, which was my first teacher, was you can't fight evil with evil, you can only make energetic progress in the good. And really that's what it comes down to. But so the thing that I would wonder about here, because Ahriman is the physical, right? Ahriman is the epitome of the physical aspect of reality, right? As opposed to Lucifer, which is so the balance. But it's not only is Ahriman as a whatever sort of evil being, but Ahriman is endemic to the structure of experience. In that way,
it's the physicality.
So you can't not have that arimanic double, that aspect of us, right? In the physical, that can be exploited in the terms of the physical, right? And the balance, of course, for Steiner is the Christic, which is balancing the Luciferic, the taking out into the spiritual solely, but our life is both. Right.
Absolutely. And we can't find our way into the light to the good without the arimanic, the Luciferic working with us or through us, through our world. If we don't have that resistance, something to bat up against, we can't find our way back to the Christ. Christ impulse.
If you're totally in the Luciferic, then you're completely ungrounded.
Right. And Steve said it. It's the society, the individual, it's completely out of balance. That's all. It's not about annihilation. That falls into the Esoteric as far as I'm concerned, or even the Surat. That's the nihilism. But the arimanic and Luciferic, the middle path is the Christ impulse. It's just but we're just way the fuck out of balance. Which is showing on the surface. This is the thing. And this is what I saw as I began deprogramming, was their goal is to bring it all to the surface. They want it walking the street. They want it in your neighbor's house. They want it in your house. They don't want it hidden anymore. To me, and this is just my version, this is not Steiner's version, but to me, when people ask me, what's the difference between Lucifer and Ahriman? See, for me, these beings are very individual. They're not all clumped together like, or even Surat, like the Antichrist. It's no. They're individuals. They have abilities, characters, personalities, everything. And to me, when people would say, what's the difference between Lucifer and Ahriman? I said, Lucifer is the philanthropist by day and the child skinner by night.
Ooh,
You'd never know who he was.
wow.
He's the one that puts the cancer hospital on the corner, you know, and gives pro bono to people, right? But the arimanic to me is in your face. It doesn't hide. It wants everything out in the open. It wants everybody to be just immersed in the chaos and the perversion. It wants it all right there. There's no pretending that it's good by day. It's just raw, hard, weight measure. You know, it's all concrete. It's just right there.
It explains it so clearly, and you have a good handle on it. Would you speak a little bit about how you came to know about Rudolf Steiner's work and how you were able to integrate it into your deprogramming and wellness?
Well, you know, I went to Christians in religious sense, in more, you know, like fundamental Christianity, exoteric Christianity, not esoteric. And I would go to them because when I first started, because they understood the demonology aspect. They knew evil exists. They didn't, you know, no holes barred. They wanted to hear what I had to say. They wanted to tell me what they knew. And it was kind of a lifeline. But then I would hit this wall of it wasn't good and bad and that's it.
It's not that
You know,
superficial.
it was too simplified for me. And I wrote the books, and I sent through a friend, Ron Patton. He knew Alana Freeland, and he hooked us up long distance. She took the books, the first books, and she started working on them. And it was really interesting. I, you know, broke, I'm always broke. And so she wrote back to me that she had started and said something about, you know, payment. And I told her, stop. I said, I don't have any money. I didn't know what was going on. And I said, please don't do any more. I'll find a way to pay you. So she halted. And 2 weeks later, I got an email from her that said, I'll do them for free.
Bless her heart.
And my mascara that I never wear is going to run. What happened as we got to know each other, we've become friends over the years. And as we got to know each other, what I realized without her coming out and saying it was, when she got into them in my novice language, she saw what she had studied for close to 40 years. She saw aspects of that in my experience, direct connection. And so she started she never pushed anything, but every once in a while, if I'd ask a question, she'd drop me a piece of information. And it, you know, it took me a while. I started to read Steiner, and then I just put it down. And I realized that it was the first time that I found someone who knew where I had been and what I had encountered.
So you were given the language to understand.
And the names and the you know, the personalities. And I remember like saying to her about, no, there's beings involved with me in my programming that are pure evil. Okay, they're not out of balance something. They're pure evil. And I remember the moment I discovered that the Asuras were part of my programming in the other realms, and that there was a direct connection for me even to Sorat, who in Steiner's language it's very he doesn't talk a lot about it. He touches on it, but he doesn't. It's almost as if I feel he has left things out because humanity wasn't ready to hear about these things. And so anyway, the gist of it was that a lot of the beings I encountered, he had descriptions for. He had on the dark side. I hadn't really come up with, you know, things on the light side. And then in deprogramming, and I won't go into this, but there were 3 experiences over several decades that I would realize were from the light side that came to me. And I began to not only see that I understood the dark side, that I was also interacting now with a lot of the beings, or parts of the hierarchies that are on the light side that he had talked about.
So were you seeing them as actively beneficials trying to help you, or?
Oh yeah, there were 3 episodes where I would say I encountered what I would call, I don't want to go into details, but the esoteric Christianity from the light side that literally in more than one occasions literally saved me and showed me not seeing a being, but encountering in an experience and in an energy, something took place that I think we talked about this in private one time. I know you guys have had some experiences where you know that something just intervened in the physical, and there's no other explanation for it in the physical. So I'm fortunate I've now been able to, which is something when I wrote the first 2 books, I hadn't had that experience. I hadn't had that, or I shouldn't say I hadn't had the experience. I hadn't recognized what had taken place, in my life. So yeah, he's really, he and other anthroposophists now who have followed in his footsteps. I mean, they just reach right into my heart and my mind when I read them or listen to them. Yeah.
That's so good to hear. And that's very comforting to hear about the beneficials.
So a couple of things. So I think I have like a few things I can say that might help people understand the arimanic sort of double and how it's, and maybe tell me if this is right in your sense. So first of all, I've not read his book, but I've heard him talk about it enough that I feel like he has a pretty good understanding of this. And his name is Anthony Peake. Or do you know who Anthony Peake is? He's really interesting. The people he interviews on his program are like a completely different set of people than what goes around in the circuit in general. But gets really into certain deep aspects of mine. And I know he wrote a book that was like about this sort of Daimon, right? That is inside of everybody, sort of like running the background kind of stuff. And it's a different maybe set of language, but I think he's talking about the same thing. And there's something about the way he communicates that stuff that is less like, he's not so reliant on making references to like the Matrix and this and that and the blah, blah, blah. Like he has a more classical sense of like describing these things that exist inside of people that I think is probably better education than pop culture references.
Oh, good.
So I've not read that book, but I've heard him talk about the book and I've heard him talk about other things. So that might help people to understand as well.
And what's the title?
I don't know the name of the book, but if you can just look up Anthony Peake. Peake is spelled Peake, and then Daimon, Daemon. I'm sure it'll bring up his book. He's written a couple of books. He's an interesting person. He probably would be fascinated with you, Elisa. But then also, like for people who do like the pop culture references, in the TV series Westworld, they talk about someone's cornerstone, like what the cornerstone of their program is, right? And, in Westworld, we're dealing with some people that are people, some people that are hosts, and then some that like maybe used to be people, but now are like, right, that kind of thing. And so there's all sorts of ways that the ideas we're talking about here are being expressed sort of in that show, but they show at a certain point how some of these main characters, like what the cornerstone of their program is. And I see the cornerstone as being that entry point or that like thing that exists, right? That allows the tightening of the screw in a certain direction or the twisting of something over here. And I discovered recently, like in a show just mid-show with Michael, we were doing the glass bead game, what Mike, but probably not, I think there's a few of them, but like there's a few, what one of my main cornerstone memories or programming like sort of things was. And it was a scene from the movie The Black Stallion. Did any of you guys ever see that movie, The Black Stallion?
Don't remember it, but I'm sure I did. Yeah.
So like whatever we were talking about triggered this memory. And for my grandmother took me to see the movie when I was little. right? And I think I enjoyed the whole movie, but I was obsessed with the scene where the little boy gave the horse the sugar cube. Obsessed with it. Like, just, I would think about it all the time, right? And I'm going to show you guys that I was only able to find one picture of that scene, right? So there's not a lot of pictures of the scene, but it's right here,
Something else.
right? So the little boy, the horse is over here, and the little boy is offering the horse
Oh, how sweet.
sugar, right? And say you have the boy, and when you watch it in the movie, there's the horse, there's the boy, and there's this sugar sitting on this thing that is
Mortal.
imprisoning him, right? Kind of thing that only peek through to what it is. And there's the sugar cube on it, right? And the level of like memory I have around that movie and that particular scene. And then I think about all the things that have gone on in my life in terms of like my relationship to crystalline substances and manipulation of behavior, right? And I knew immediately that like that was a very pivotal idea that was implanted in my mind I had to have been about 5 or 6 when I saw that. Right? So that's a particular time in a young person's programming, whether they're just your average everyday kid or whether they're part of something a little bit more nefarious or a little bit more outside of the bounds, right? But both from like the darker or negative side, right? The arimanic double side of like my drug addiction, my sugar addiction, how it played into manipulating my behavior, how it played into creating a layer of not remembering things correctly or being confused about what happened or getting one to act in a way that they wouldn't otherwise act, but they will because they want this thing or they've had this thing or whatever on that side. And then in my own real life, really the thing that started me on my own trajectory, just away from, you know, I'd been on the show with Randy and whatnot. But when I started talking about sugar as programmable matter, it's opened up this whole other thing for me, you know, in the I am Emily, outer world, the light versus the dark kind of thing. But that picture right there, that memory from when I was little, that seeing that movie, I think is a cornerstone that can be used like to influence me towards good works and towards self-responsibility and towards all this kind of stuff. But also that same portal was the twist, where they twisted the screw the other way, or where I allowed the screw to be twisted the other way. And so the arimanic double like exists on both sides, like the double exists on the other side of that portal from who you see as yourself. Is that about right, Elisa?
Sounds good to me. And it does. It makes a lot of sense. And also, there's another aspect, and I'm not sure I can even relate to Cornerstone in the spiritual sense of as if someone who's controlling someone else, the control is the cornerstone for the person that's controlling. So the actual, they become that cornerstone of whatever and I'm thinking in the terms of esoteric and spiritual, the victim, but because there are victims, the victim is the cornerstone for whatever this controller is trying to work out. So yeah, very interesting. And I want to read something really quick, if I may. This was something that Ilana posted, probably on Facebook, after she had listened to a Dutch victim at the ITCCS, that international tribunal that everybody was doing. I don't know who the victim was, but this is really. Anyway, I copied it down because it really sums it up. So if I may, the quote was, "Satanic rites bind top global elites to the will of an egregor used by a force that is inimical to humanity, as it has been for millions of years, an evolving consciousness responsible for its free will. This egregor and the force it serves intend to contain the human spirit in matter, such as AI-run brain-computer interface, so it can be utterly controlled. The blood sacrifices serve two purposes: to feed this force and terrify the minions into absolute submission. Royalty are able to survive the centuries, royalties able to survive the centuries have submitted. Otherwise, their bloodline would be eliminated and another take its place. Thus, we see how the past still dominates. The freedom of true individuality on earth is a long haul of many lifetimes. And that, to me, pretty well sums up what we're really talking about. And the sense of, I've experienced smaller egregors in locations where I've lived and worked, where I've noticed, so there's the bigger version, not just the version in each individual, but I've noticed that when I am struggling with something over and over, very, very much a pattern, and I've noticed that I'll get in the car to go to town to do something, and when I get a certain distance away, I notice it's like, wait a minute, it took several times, wait a minute, I feel different. Just being out here, not being in that location. And so, we're dealing with the internal version. And I want to mention this as far as the arimanic, and you guys probably already know this, but the arimanic is in the nervous system. Well, everything they're doing right now in the arimanic age, everything they're doing right now is dealing with the neural networks. This whole attempt at control, which is the arimanic energy, which is not that the Luciferic is gone or the Asuras don't play in, but that at this time, it's just fascinating to me that the nervous system is and the neural networks are what are attempting to be taken over by, these big corporates, always with the guise of, this is the benefit to humanity. We're going to evolve further, right?
Right.
But really what they're
best
doing,
interests in mind.
Right.
yeah, really what they're doing is allowing the arimanic. I mean, I can't say, I don't know, people have asked me, is this arimanic going to incarnate into a human? I have no connection personally to that at all. I don't know if that's going to happen. But I mean, really, look at this technology.
Oh,
we're using it for
stunning.
good, but look at the technology and what it's doing. To me, it's really kind of already incarnated, hasn't it? I mean,
You would have to
maybe
say
there's a
so.
follow-up, but I think that's what we're looking at. So,
And
yeah.
does this work with the electromagnetics? You think of that system and then the electromagnetics of our body?
Well,
Is
and that
the
would be
interface
the Luciferic and the arimanic, because it's
electricity.
correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the Luciferic magnetic? Is that right, Steve? Is the Luciferic magnetic and Ariman is
Somehow I would
Electric.
think the other way.
Fingertip.
In my mind, I would think the other way, because I remember Robert Gilbert saying that electricity is degraded
Etheric. No.
light.
Etheric light. Yeah. No point talking about it because it's it's a long time ago. I don't have it really.
Right.
right.
Fingertip information.
But it seems-
But what you're talking about also runs through the blood, and for Steiner, you control the ego or the individuation, not the ego as the idiot
But the
Freud
I
said,
am.
but that whole I amness of yourself, you control that through controlling the blood, and that's the injections, and that's and
Yep.
that's the running and then going into the nervous system and the rearranging our nervous system and DNA, et cetera, et cetera.
They know
know?
exactly what they're doing.
You know?
Exactly. They pinpoint with
Okay, so a couple things I want to say. So Elisa, first what you were talking about like, oh, you go somewhere and then like you leave that zone and you're like, wait, what the heck? It doesn't like, there's no like visible like wall or whatever. That's a big thing, right? Like I've definitely had that before where it's like you pass a certain exit on the freeway and you're like, what just happened? Right? Like everything looks the same, but like there was this one area that I used to, like, there was two ways I used to go to work when I was still living at the house in Chatsworth, right? Sometimes, depending on where I was coming from, I'd go sort of this back way. And if I was coming from somewhere else, I'd go this other way. There's two different sort of paths. And on one of them, at a certain point, like every time I passed that point on the freeway, I would start to feel like I was on drugs again. Like I felt like I had just done a line of meth, right? Every time. And on this other one, when I passed a certain point, I would start to get sleepy at the same point every time, right? And, you know, sure, it's possible that like once it's happened a couple of times, then you expect for it to happen and all of that. So that just amplifies the effect, right? Because, you know, then it's, you know, but the fact is the first time it happens, you're not thinking that. And so like, that's a thing. And you would never think that it was that at first. So it takes a while of recognition before you realize. And then also with some of these fields, and this gets into electromagnetism and frequencies and whatnot as well. Like if it's an egregor running it or some kind of thing that like, okay, like this is my domain right here. And I'm sort of like, you can go into a space and it feels one way for one person and another for another based on that person's sort of tie-in with whatever emotional field or reality that egregor is kind of like interested in or in charge of, right? So when I went with Laura to visit her family in Iowa for the first time, I had never really been to the Midwest, right? And she had described it to me like whenever she goes to Iowa, she feels this particular certain way and blah, blah, blah. So we had been in Nebraska, had lunch with my friend who's a delightful person, and it was all very chipper. And where we were in Omaha, and it's like about an hour to where you cross into Iowa. Like literally, the moment we crossed the state line, it felt completely different to me. For her, that feeling is associated with things that are of a more like negative or upsetting or depressing or whatever kind of thing. For me, it's not, because I didn't have life experiences there that like dictate that, oh, when I feel this, it makes me think of that or whatever. Right. So for me, it was still a fine feeling. It was just a different feeling, but it was so significant that it's like, okay, like there is obviously some frequency band that like Iowa is in that is different than Nebraska. And if there's energetics or spirits or some kind of egregor or whatever that are associated with that, like Laura is part of that game that I'm not, because I've never been there before. So I haven't been identified yet as a player on a board to start like associating those feelings with memories or whatever. But it was like very, very obvious to me, right? Like it was unmistakable.
Yeah, I think you hit the ethanol egregor.
Well,
What was that? I
we
missed that.
experienced-
The ethanol egregor.
I don't get it.
So that's ethanol is all from the corner in Iowa.
Oh,
So
but we experienced that going from Hungary into Germany on the train. And Hungary had this real, it was in the early 90s, like 92, 93, what year?
It was right after the
Well, it
fall of
was
Soviet
during
Union.
Bosnia-Herzegovina war and blah, blah, blah. But there was this real heavy feeling in Hungary. Just people wouldn't smile at you. They wouldn't acknowledge you. It was this really heavy overlay. And the minute we crossed the border into Germany, everything lightened up. It was palpable. So I imagine that's something similar to what you're describing.
Or like when we flew back from Australia in 2010, the second the wheels hit the ground, I felt this like construct heaviness
In the United States.
about everything. And so that would be a larger United
Right,
States
right.
arimanic egregor, United States being hometown of
And that was
Ariman,
like
really
2011,
2010.
10?
Yeah.
So I wanted to say that, but I also,
Well, let me ask, should I define egregor?
Sure, I think that would be great because we
Yeah.
assume that everybody knows the terms, but they don't.
So let me see if I've got the whole.
And it reminds me of thought form healing that, I don't know, Emily, do you know Ivor Francis and Diane Cantwell? they do a form of,
But my mind already is imagining like what that is.
yeah, but they do this similar kind of
Yeah.
thing with thought
Also-
forms.
Also, great glossary in the book, by the way.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's right. We did. We really expanded the lexicon. Okay, so occult concept representing an entity, non-physical, that arises from the collective thoughts of a distinct group of people. A group thought form created intentionally or unintentionally, it becomes, this is key, it becomes autonomous with the power to
Yeah.
influence
Mhm.
for better or worse.
Good.
So once it develops, it'll do anything to survive.
Sure.
Yeah.
Is that your own from your book?
No, actually, I don't have egregor in there because I don't think I have the word in there. But where did I get that? I'm not sure where I got it. I looked it up somewhere online.
It's helpful.
So, okay, I also wanted to respond to what you said about the nervous system, right? So this is, 100% right. I was on a flight on the way back from somewhere one time. And when you're like sitting there on the runway before they've told you have to put your phone on airplane and you're realizing, shit, like if you forgot to bring a book and you're like, damn it, I don't have anything downloaded or to read or to listen to. And so you're in the race to do something to get before you have to do that. Right. So I don't know how, but like somehow this was back when I still had Kindle on my phone. Something popped up that was just titled Glands. Right. And there was like a 1-sentence description of it. And so I downloaded it and I started reading it. And it was this basically like a little manual or a handbook that someone had made that was trying to explain to people that this book was like 100 years old, right? The most important thing that they could learn to be able to deal with what was coming in the future is to learn how to control your own endocrine system.
Wow.
That is how you're going to be manipulated, right? And so I downloaded, there was just a few chapters of it available that way. So I downloaded that and I read a little bit of it and I guess I fell asleep. And eventually I forgot about it. But when I started doing shows and whatever, I kept thinking about it and I could never find it again. Like I didn't have Kindle anymore. I couldn't get back into it. I could never find it. And then it came up again recently and I went looking for it and I was actually able to find it and find the whole PDF online, right? And it is, so I pull it open here. Let me see if I can show you guys. So if people go and want to find it online, I still haven't read the whole book. I need to,
Wow.
the whole book, right? And I think this was
MORC, huh?
Oh, how about that?
I don't know who that is. Like, right? So
That's the Rosicrucian
Out in
group
California.
is it?
California, AMORC. And
yes,
yeah,
okay.
go ahead.
In there it talks about. So this is a guy who's a Rosicrucian who
Interesting.
wanted to help. This was like in the this is a long time ago, right? So this was like, this was something that he felt like he needed, that this needed to be available to the people who would go looking for it and wanting to source us out. Right? So I read the whole book. I need to, but the small amount that I read on the airplane, right, that day, and at the timing that I was reading it, everything like that all the modifications and exposures that are being done that affect our nervous system. Part of the way that is done is by getting our endocrine system to secrete in a particular way that causes certain reactions in the nervous system that then completely control sort of our behavior. And we're led to believe that like those things are outside of our control. Your body is just doing it, right? And blah, blah, blah. But according to this book, both through obviously what we choose to take into our body, nutrition, ideas, experiences, but also through certain practices, one can learn to control the glands and when and what to secrete and in what amounts and whatnot that will render you not affected by or not as severely or as much easily affected by all of these outer attacks on the endocrine and therefore the nervous system because they're related, right? And if you look at talked about the invisible guardians, right? And I think this is when you were talking about these other light entities that sort of were involved, I think there's a correlation here, because I too have had an experience that, a couple of experiences, but one in particular that is beyond my ability to understand. But whatever was communicating with me at the time that it happened, let me know immediately, you have got to get your endocrine system and your nervous system under control this instant, or it is not going to be good. Do this now. And I did something I never do, right? And I avoided getting in big, serious trouble, right?
So was it something very specific?
Yeah, it was very specific, right? So I hit a man in a Trader Joe's parking lot with my car, right? I was high on drugs. I had been up for days. And I had gone to the store, and like, I don't think I was not out of it in any way. Like, what literally really happened was, poor judgment. I went to the store when it was raining outside wearing slippers, and my foot slipped off the brake and my car lunged forward and it hit him. Right. So it wasn't like I wasn't paying attention or whatever. But the fact of the matter is I was on drugs. I was loaded with drugs in my system. And now I was like panicked. Right. And somebody called the police, right? Kind of thing. Like, I mean, I got out of the car. He was out for a second, and then he was back, and I talked to him and his wife. And, it was not it was a reasonable situation, but two things happened immediately. Right. So I knew that the police were called and that they were coming, and a voice in my head was like, you need to get calm right now, which is not something I ever think about. You need to start breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth, one nostril at a time, in the right side, out the left, then the other way. And I don't know anything about this kind of thing. It was like some weird pattern. I don't exactly remember. And then two people came out of nowhere, and they were like, we are Christians. We're going to pray for you. And I was like, thank you. I was like, I'm not a believer, but at this point I pray. And so they're standing here praying, and I'm doing this fucking breathing exercises, right? And the police come and they talk to me and they take my license and all of that kind of stuff and whatever. And then they let me go. And I was high as a kite, and I had been up for days, right? But, like I was just about to start, like, it was within a few months or a year of that I made the step that started me on the path towards getting my life together, right? And had it gone the other way, had I been arrested and then gotten, whatever it was kind of thing. But the instructions were nothing about, oh, it's okay, it's not your fault, your feelings, It was, start doing this to control your system now, right? Like, there was no other bullshit, right? And so when you were talking about some of that stuff before, I was thinking about this book and the Guardians, the invisible kind of, thing. I think this is something that is really practical that people should really start to think about. Like, everyone is really involved. And I understand the impulse, and I've had it before, of trying to get the screwtards or whatever to stop doing the things that they're doing. But even if you can stop one, another thing pops up, another. Mm-hmm. It's back to the personal responsibility. There are methods by which you can learn to control what your body does with whatever the input is, right? And that is probably at this point a better use of time than protesting or writing letters or trying to convince everybody else of a reality that is right in front of their face, but they refuse to acknowledge or whatnot. And
there wasn't a lot of intellectual activity going on. It was just, you're totally in the moment.
Totally in the moment.
Do this
now, right now. Like,
Beautiful.
don't cry. Don't even, don't
defend yourself. Yeah.
Don't do any of that stuff. Be honest with them, when they ask you what happened, because that is what happened, right? Don't try and come up with some other whatever. Just tell them, I'm stupid. I wore slippers because it is what happened. Right? But it was none of it was just like none of that shit. It was just breathe now. Do this breathing pattern. There's one other time I had something happen like that with breathing, or not really breathing, but sort of breathing. I was at the dentist, right? And the girl who was in charge of like spraying the water in your mouth while the dentist was working on me was new. And she was basically waterboarding me, right? She didn't she didn't fit down pat. And so way too much water was like going in than she was sucking out. And like a couple times I stopped, she wasn't getting it. And so we had to, you know, whatever. And so I am sitting there going like, okay, what am I going to do here? And like the weirdest thing started happening. All of a sudden, like there was a pink, I closed my eyes and this pink light bulb, like this
No,
appeared. I
that's
closed
so Philip K. Dick, you know that, right?
light appeared. I didn't know that. Pink light appeared. And the pink light was
What?
like doing some weird. Do you guys remember the game? It was called Pong.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
that's what,
Yeah.
that was high tech when I was in high school.
That's right.
Right, some like weird pattern. It was pink and it was like bouncing off, and I started like watching it with my eyes, and then what it started like somehow like when I was doing this pattern, like this little pocket like on the side of my neck opened up as
You
like
know, I'm very visual, and as you're talking, I'm with you. Go ahead.
some little pocket opened up, and I was able to breathe through that. So even though there was like, it was the fucking weirdest thing. It
Oh,
was like,
that's weird too.
That's like, what's his
That's
name?
weird
The
too.
guy from Pfizer, right?
so some little thing opened up, and it was almost like when that person's choking and they put a pipe through your trachea. It was like that, but it was like by concentrating on this
But
thing.
isn't that like the breathing underwater thing?
Well, this gets into the underwater bar.
That's where your gills would
So
be.
you had a skill there, Emily.
Right. But it was like it came at that moment of like, right. So
But
you
what
know,
was the pink light doing?
the pink, it was the ball in the Pong. So like in Pong, it's like there was this.
So it was just for you to watch, for you to focus? Is that was a focus to take your mind off?
There was it was like I think the pattern was to try and regulate how I was like breathing or my heartbeat or something like that, right? But it was like it came at that same kind of moment, like Houston, we're about to have a problem, right? And so even if it was something embedded in me, like probably the breathing exercise was too, it was so far removed from anything current in my mind that I would not have thought of that. So it almost seemed like there was somebody there to just turn that light on and say, look at this or do this or whatever,
Must
right?
be a little bit off topic, but I mean, you must know the story of Philip K. Dick and his book Valis, Vast Active Living Intelligence System. He was at the dentist's office when he gets hit by a pink light and has his like illumination experience.
I'm very familiar with Philip K. Dick on certain levels, but I'm not
I
familiar.
never read Valis,
I
but that's what's with the dentist and the pink light.
Wow.
I didn't know. I mean,
What's up with that?
I knew he had some story about something that happened at a dentist, but I didn't know it was
That
that.
was the story. So he gets hit with this download and through a pink light.
Oh, that's
Well,
And
actually-
he called it Valis, and it was Vast Active Living Intelligence System.
Wow.
He ended up writing 1,000,000 words trying to explain it.
Right.
But actually, interestingly enough, he had been to the dentist and he was getting painkillers delivered.
Uh-huh.
And this young girl comes in to deliver the painkillers to the door, and she had the Christian fish on a
Uh-huh,
necklace, and that bounced off and then sent the pink light into his third eye.
Oh,
and-
there's the
and woke him up.
bouncing.
So
Wow.
so that's another interesting element to that whole thing.
So,
Isn't that something?
so I think, and Elisa, I want to ask you about this. And I don't think you and I have ever talked about this, but and we can maybe just round up the first hour after this. It is my observation that Philip K. Dick was let me say, Philip K. Dick was the first targeted individual. And when I say that, I don't mean that there weren't other people who had that, but when you go, everybody is on a certain level. And when you go from being a normal person to like quote unquote targeted individual, and I have all kinds of issues around that idea and that identity and that statement, but just for the sake of people understanding this conversation, the switch happens when you recognize it, right? And he was the first person to have a recognition that he was able to explain in any way that made sense, right?
Articulate it.
That moment when he says that at that press conference or whatever, when he says what he's saying, like that sort of burst us into a whole new world, kind of akin to when Albert Hoffman discovered LSD or Oppenheimer exploded the bomb or whatever, right? The recognition of what is going on is the moment someone becomes the targeted individual, like, because it's going on all around us. It's happening to everybody, but some people seem to be sensitive to it and others not. And that moment of like recognition and then the ability to express it in any meaningful way, like takes you into this sort of other realm. And I think he has to have been the first one that we could say, like, yes, what he's describing qualifies as what this phenomenon is now described as, right?
Well, and I think of his predecessor as Shelby Downard.
Well,
Yes.
Michael loves to talk about the James Shelby Downard vortex.
Oh my gosh, he's just, I mean, that
He's-
guy was
yeah.
like, I mean, it was, and that was bizarre too. Had all the bizarre elements to it. But, well, maybe it's like, what was it in Lord of the Rings? I always use this analogy, the eye of Sauron.
Right.
And when your little head pops up above the veil and looks around, that light comes and goes, uh-oh, we got a live one,
We got
right?
one.
And then because there is, you're right. I mean, the whole thing is mind control, and it's not just conditioning, it's programming. The whole thing is programming. However, when does this concerted effort on the individual come in? It's not always when they recognize it. I mean, sometimes they get picked out of the mass for an individualized program, and that's also true. So
to me, it seems like but it is recognition in one way.
Dark City. It's Dark City. It's
Great, I just did a great show with Howdy on Dark City. I don't know if you've seen it yet. We just did a really good rundown of.
Oh, did you? No, I haven't.
Really good. I'll
To
send you the.
watch it.
Is that a YouTube channel or?
It's a movie.
Oh,
We
it's a
can-
movie.
we
It's a
can watch
movie,
it.
and
Just
it's-
haven't watched it.
You gotta see it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an older movie
Good.
with Rufus Sewell, and I mean, it is not really the explanation of what really is, but it is quite the metaphor for what is really going on in society and humanity and
So
would you recommend us watching your show before the movie or after, Emily?
I don't know. I think it would be a different experience each way, both valid, right?
So
Both.
you do one, I'll do the other.
Okay. Exactly. Them too. But the only thing I would push back on, Elisa, is sometimes a person isn't aware that they're aware yet. And when the system decides to create a more individualized program, is because the system has had the recognition that there's going to be a problem with this person, because this person has the ability, right? So sometimes the person becomes aware before the system gets concerned that they're going to become aware. And other times the person just does a thing that is the hit clue to the system that like they're going to have a problem. And so the machinations start like a minute or two before the person becomes aware, right? But that's basically it. It's kind of like, lots of people walk by jewelry stores. Jewelry stores have laser armed security systems, and a lot of them have security guards inside. Everybody walks by all the time, right? It doesn't pay any attention, right? And occasionally someone is robbing a jewelry store, so the mounted response to the robber makes sense, right? But generally, the security starts looking at the person who just stares too long at the store for a second on a pass by, maybe the day or the week or the month before they're going to break in, or they never are going to break in, but for some reason they're just taken with the jewelry store and they look. And so the system starts worrying, okay, maybe this person's casing the joint. It's like that same kind of thing, right? It's
no,
like,
I hear what you're saying. However, you're leaving out the human element, and that's my story is I went from the human element into remote. I went from the human element into the technologies, and yes, almost everything. And by the way, just so you know, I got hit really hard last night when I went to turn the light out. I haven't slept a minute since yesterday. And I know it had to do with what we're doing, and it was very clear what I mean, it was very So that to me is an AI system. That's a system that I'm in, and when it wants to, it does what it wants to do. However, the old days, there was a person involved. There was a human body involved.
Oh.
So where is that crossover? For example, I know of a woman who I believe it was in California, lived in these condos. The guy that lived next door left his gas on his stove. There was an explosion. It burned most of her place. She confronted him, walked up to him and got in his face about what he had done, and he needed to take responsibility, blah, blah, blah. You can imagine the conversation. He stood there, stone cold. And when she was done, a sly smile came across his face, and he said, lady, he said, you just messed with the wrong man.
No.
The next day, she was under 24/7 targeting. She had to leave. She was on the road. She was on the run, simply because she talked to said the wrong thing to the wrong person.
Because she identified,
Yeah.
called him out.
And she said it was, I mean, from what I heard it secondhand from a friend of mine, said that the smile was the most sinister thing she had ever seen.
Right.
Just, he wasn't bothered in the least.
But there was that clear interaction of what started it. There's
Absolutely.
people who claim to be targeted, who don't have any identifying point. And so it's a much more nebulous string to try and sort out. And that is where I'm talking about this other thing.
Yeah.
Fully
And we're on systems now. I mean, it's, I had the encounter of seeing through, not through his eyes. I always said it was through his eyes, but I'm actually looking at the back of his head. And they were initiating, as I was drifting into that first part of sleep, they were initiating the AI program through him. He's what Robert Duncan would call a psychic warrior. And for a split second, I had a perfect view of the back of his head, the electrodes hooked to him. I knew his eyes were closed. He's in front of this huge monitor. I thought it was like a computer that he was interacting with, but I realized later it was running from left to right. It was a grid just moving really fast. It was the readout between my brain and his. So there were the people, there's that human element, but I absolutely agree that now we're in a system that is tapping into everything we do through the Internet of Things, through computers, through smartphones, through all of it, through cell towers, through Gwen towers, whatever, satellites. And there's a system that's now monitoring all of that activity and making the decisions where we don't necessarily need the person anymore. There's no guy running on you on a computer anymore. It's a system deciding. And I've seen cycles of this in my own experience where there's like X amount of time I go through this and that stops. Then there might be a break of a month or so and something else would start up, as if they're running programs. It's hooking you into a particular program based on God only knows what's making that decision. Your brain waves, your tendencies, your nervous system, your heartbeat, you're walking by the jewelry store, what is kicking that off, that AI system decides what's next. Who's loading you in? Who's deciding? Is it all the AI system? How do you wind up in there in the first place? That's the big question.
What you're talking about really dovetails into the Look Out for Charlie material, right? With him and gotten to know him, and I've been listening to him on and off for years. Actually, you were the first person to turn me on to him sort of years ago. But in almost every circumstance, when he examines the audio, right, there is some sort of computerized system talking about whatever is happening exactly in the room. And it's impossible that there's like an entire committee of people taking meetings about what everyone is doing when they're sleeping. It's a machine. It's a system that provides feedback and has certain cues. And, it's some sort of system so vast that it's challenging to imagine, but that's what he says. He says it's a surveillance weapon. It's not something beaming something at you. It's not the way people think of it, because there's a way you perceive something when you're on the receiving end, right? That is not necessarily accurate because it's only you're looking at it just from one angle, right? And this is something much more like broad scoped and general in nature. But that's what he calls it. He calls it a surveillance weapon, right? So, all right.
Can I throw one more thing in
Sure.
before and this has been so delicious. That smile, that person. So that smile, and because I've just been reading about it and about to write about it in the book I'm working on, that it's called a sardonic smile, right? And the sardonic comes from Sardinia. And back in the ancient world, they saw the Sardinians, that the Phoenicians controlled Sardinia, and they did child sacrifice there. And they not only child sacrifice, but they also did what was called genocide, which is the killing of the old people and things like that. And that smile, so there would be the grimace of actually of the child being burned in their what they call braziers, and the horrific of it, and also the smile of the people doing it. So this just shows how old this program is. It's going back, several thousand BC.
Wow.
And that smile has endured in its bizarre way. So anyway,
Wow.
Not to end on a light note or anything, but I think I wanted to throw that in.
No, that's very interesting.
I wanted to see, because I can imagine in my head what you're describing. So I was trying to see if there was like a good picture.
I don't see any of them that look to me like, because it's like a mixture of I've entrapped you.
Yeah, total control, just
Yeah.
no emotion, no
Right.
fear, just I am so going to be over you.
Very
I
sinister.
have no idea what I'm going to put you into.
Yeah, these don't quite capture it for me.
Well, that's why I thought this one was the best, because, right, like the wolf, like, is like, this person doesn't know I'm about to eat them because I look like a person and not eat them for lunch, right? So I felt like this was better than any of the pictures that wanted, right? And this is this also speaks to the wolf in sheep's clothing.
It's like a very cold, psychopathic smile.
And I want to throw in just real quick, I know we got to wrap up. There's also the picking people for, I know someone in corporate world, in computer world, and her boss wanted her. He just wanted her. So she entered into the most horrific thing you can imagine, because he wanted her and she didn't want anything to do with him.
He set his sights.
Yeah.
Boy.
This is where it's gone,
All right.
No, it's bad. We do.
So we're going to wrap up the public segment here. We're going to move over to the patron segment, where we're just going to have like a general family chat.
We're going to talk about chrysanthemums.
Right? Like the going on. So
you're not going to miss anything by Patreon.
Elisa, like, the book is not quite ready yet. I don't know if this will go out. I don't know. We haven't decided how we're going to put this out yet. So this may come out before it's ready or after it's ready or whatever it is. So I'm not sure yet. I think once it's out, you and I may do a series of conversations about some of it. And of course, you'll be available to be interviewed by other people as well. But in the meantime, for right now, is there any information you want to share about?
Well, it's still called Our Life Beyond MK Ultra, but it's Our Life Beyond MK Ultra Then and Now.
Okay.
So that's it's a whole new edition. It's got its own ISBN. It's a separate book. The other books will come down. I don't even want people to go there anymore. As a matter of fact, it's going to happen by the end of the month, whether the first one's ready, the new one's ready or not.
It looks good. And it looks good.
It looks good. And you can find it at Logosophia LLC. What is it? Logosophia.com?
It's
Logosophia Books.
Yeah, logosophiabooks.com, and at which point we'll soon we'll offer it for pre-sale as soon as we can, pretty much as soon as I have a finished cover to use. And then, so
Right.
and it I don't know, maybe 3 weeks, a month. It all depends on our designer's schedule at the moment.
We're filming
close.
this today. We're recording this on October 26th. So from whenever
I really want
this day.
to encourage people to buy the book directly from Chris, Steve, right? That ensures that Elisa gets the most amount of it that she can possibly get, as opposed to buying it through Amazon or whatever. And that Chris and Steve get a piece of that. And so doing it this way ensures that as much of the money as possible goes back to our own community of people. And we would,
Very important.
Thank
not
you.
to Jeff Bezos,
Very
right?
important.
Yeah.
And what has happened in the past is that, like with Jean Wayner's book, Walking with Aletheia, which is also about ritual abuse through the Catholic Church. Big splash in the beginning, so Amazon picked up a lot of them. Then what didn't sell, we have to buy back, right?
The return.
Wow.
So, so it's really painful financially for us if you go through Amazon on 2 counts. If there's a big splash in the beginning and they say, oh, there's activity here, we'll buy a big bunch, and then it kind of tapers off, well, we end up then having to eat that twice.
Yeah, so guys, just don't on this. I too understand and have been victim of the Amazon mind and reality control, that things are just sometimes easier if you go right.
I know, us too.
Station this time, because this is the unusual opportunity to support both Elisa and the Crimis. Usually, when you buy stuff, we okay, support the author, or to support the public. But this time we know them both. So they're known and loved in this community. So let's support them and do it that way. Anything else you guys want to say, Chris and Steve, before we wrap up the public hour about what
No,
I can't think of a thing.
and really thanks, just overall thanks to you, Emily, for bringing Elisa our way, and to Lisa for giving us the opportunity to bring this book into the world.
And I love your idea for taking certain chapters out and working with Elisa in the future. I think that's brilliant, and that keeps it alive.
something came up for me personally recently that shocked me, that I did not expect for this to come up. And having some framework based on this being something that Elisa touched on very graphically in her book, it was very clear to me when the thing came up what it was. And so I didn't have to be waddling around trying to sort out what all of this was and meant, and why was I thinking this, and why, blah, blah, blah. So it's, yeah. So I think there would be some value in that. Okay, if you would like to join us for the rest of the chat, patreon.com/offplanetmedia, emilymoyer.locals.com, or rockfin.com/Emily Moyer. We will see you on the other side.